Okay. So as we wait for other people, if oh, there's Carolyn. I will make a couple of announcements. This is the last module and the last Zoom call of the 12 module training program.
Okay.
Module 1 will be released again on September 15th. So those of you who started in any of the other launches, so I did several launches, one in November, one in February, one in April, one in June. If you started after on the November one or after, then the rotation starts every 12 months. I also wanted to let you know that during this session, the male partner mentions an interview that Alain de Bottom had with Krista Tippett from On Being. And after the Zoom call, I will send you the link to it because it's marvelous. I actually read his books and I'm very familiar with his work. And in fact, it has influenced me a lot. And the article that Krista Tippett mentions that is the most widely read on the New York Times, I'm going to send you the link up to that one too, is called "You Always Marry the Wrong Person." And that's how I first became aware of his work. And I've been reading his work. And this interview is really, really wonderful. So I'm going to send that to you. I also wanted to announce that I am doing a launch starting September 9th. So you should be getting the launch emails. And feel free to forward them to people that you think may be interested in joining the Academy once you start getting them. If you are not going to forward them, and then just disregard them. But don't unsubscribe, because that's how you'll get announcements when I publish a new blog. So I know the 6 emails are a little bit annoying. But you can just disregard them and try not to unsubscribe so you get the emails about the blogs. The module 1, as I said, will be dropped September 15th, but I have decided to discontinue the office hours because as it is, the Zoom calls are really not even very well attended. So I know that a lot of people are watching them after, but the office hours in the last 2 or 3, there just hasn't been anybody. I'm going to honor the commitment I made to have him, and I will be there on Wednesday, next Wednesday. But I've decided to do that. If you are if you want an extra hour, I will honor that too, because I said that in my marketing materials when you joined. So if you feel like you're getting gypped out of something, let me know and I will honor that time. Okay, that's it for the announcements. Actually, I'm going to make another short one, which is that this module has the lesson has at the end, I hope that you can get to the end of the lesson. It has a section on countertransference. For those of you, I don't know that I've put that in the title of it. It says psychodynamic, but it has the last 10 minutes of the lesson is on countertransference. So I need to change the title of on the website. And of course, there's the 2 interventions that I also have in the toolbox. Okay. So I want to start by asking you if you have any questions. I emailed and requested questions, but I didn't get any, so I don't have any. It's the holiday weekend, so yeah. So if you were able to listen to the 12 session, to the module 12 session or the lesson, and you have any comments or questions, once you start giving me comments or questions, then I start talking. So
one thing I noticed that does relate to the transference, countertransference in the section in which you talk about, our needing to work on our own things so that we don't participate, that as best possible, I suppose, we're aware of the various responses we have to clients. What I noticed was how sturdy you are in relation to the times, especially when the male partner kind of says, no, everything you've said is wrong. I disagree. And I thought he does it fairly, at least it felt to me like it was fairly often, that he was correcting and so on in an honest way. It didn't seem combative, but I was impressed with how, okay, you just kind of kept going. Like you were demonstrating to us a kind of way to just stay with that and roll with that and still get your points across. I felt like there were a couple of times you said, wait, but I still have this point here, even though you're disagreeing with me. So it just I thought was a good illustration of how much we need to do our own work, and be ready for that and not be bothered by the bumps.
right. You mean rather than pressing the point or arguing?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I listen. I always re-listen to the audios before this meeting, and I don't know that I always do that. But I do. But I'm appreciative of your comment. I did do it here, but I'm not sure what my motivation was. So I think part of my motivation was that I was focusing more on her.
Yeah.
But it's true, she agreed with me and he didn't. So I do feel like I dropped it for that reason. But I have to keep that in the back of my mind. So I do believe, and I still do, that he's motivated to not feel obligated to her and not and to not fear her disappointment. I believe that is a motivator for him, and it comes from his family of origin and the way in which one of his parents was disappointed in him, and how that replays with her whenever, and how much of a good fit they are. So she is disappointed in him, and he's saying to her, I'm done with that. I don't want to live like that anymore. I don't want to do that anymore. I think it was very poignant, what he does and how he articulates it. But he wasn't ready to hear his vulnerability or his vulnerable parts. And I do think either I had picked it up after, or, once we focused on it's not that so just to finish up the point, I may not have pressed in the moment, but that doesn't mean that I don't bring it back up.
It was a fascinating, demonstration set. I know it was not a demonstration, but the session, in the sense of it demonstrated how exactly what you're saying, of how to sort of stick to the point that you have, which is, I think that there's some vulnerability here we have to talk about, while they kept saying no, in various ways. She would go back around of, no, it's this other thing, no, it's this other thing, and you just held, over time. I think it really shows how to sit with that over time. It was really interesting presentation, and it sounded like it went a little longer. Was the full session a little longer than the whole recording?
Right. There is an abrupt ending there,
Sure.
but I think we stopped right after there. It did not go any longer. That was the end of it.
Okay. Gotcha.
I think I cut out the, okay, we're out of time. Let's
Yeah.
pick it up next time. Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
So say more, and I'll turn to you, Linda, in a minute. Just say a bit more, Carolyn, about what was good and what was it a demonstration of? And hi, Monica.
Hi, sorry I'm late.
No problem.
Mhm.
If you will.
Yeah. I guess I felt like it just showed so well it's you just are at the edge of your seat listening because you think there's something happening here and they want to move at a slower pace or they want to stay with their own. They were different, but his especially was, I'm going to be heard exactly as I want to be heard. And he was just determined to do that. And he kept on that, which is fascinating. So I felt like partly you made space for that, for him to hold tenaciously to his point. There was a lot going on in terms of, emotions rising at various points, and she would cut him off. And I can't remember which told the other one to stop raising their voice, but that, all of those points of all of that. And I felt like you showed kind of how to both sit with that and then also at times to say, okay, hold on, I have to say something here. And so I don't know that I have specific comments about it, but I thought, oh my goodness, this is so skillful, kind of, and so
right. So thank you for what you're saying is making me think of is that what I think it's a good demonstration, in addition to what you're saying, is of the work that they've done all year long and of their ability to soothe each other and or themselves, which is why looking back, I think that's why I stayed out of the way for a lot of the session, because I thought that they were doing a great job at giving each other space for what needed to happen. So and that was not like that in the beginning. I'm a lot more active and directive and interrupting and requesting permission to do that and in the beginning, but here they were really they did a great job, and this was a crucial session that was a turning point for them. Yeah, so and I worry that the same question that came up in other sessions will come up here, which is that, well, these are wonderful people who did a wonderful job, and I don't have these kinds of clients, and I will say, they were really, really bad in the beginning. They were not able to do what they did in this session. They were completely undifferentiated, completely ignoring each other's wishes. She was completely out of control. He was completely passive aggressive, not honest. It was really bad. Like I say in the intro of the session about the ways in which they interacted. They couldn't even come up. They could not set up a bike ride together. They were not able to do that because they would get into a huge fight and not talk for a week. So it was really bad. And it is the same couple as in module 5. So I think you can see the evolution too. Okay, Linda, do you have any thoughts or comments or questions?
I have a couple comments. Just I am listening to the session, kind of tagging along with what you just talked about. I just kind of noticed the flow a lot and how they would at times escalate, and then you sometimes would intervene, or sometimes they would regulate themselves. And so I just kind of was taking a look at your role and kind of directing that somewhat. And then I think also just like the reflective listening that they were able to do with each other was so skilled. And so I'm intrigued by how they got there. Like when you have a couple that's more high conflict, where I could see how that could easily have been that way with them, you know, just in how they were, their few interchanges that got a little heated, and kind of, you know, wondering how you can engage someone to kind of slow them down. And then also I find, especially when it's a male that kind of does, I think at one point he even muted her. Am I right on that? In the session?
Oh, they were in the same room.
They were in the same room? Okay. For some reason, I thought he did something that kind of silenced her during the session. But I know for myself, in terms of countertransference, when there is a male that gets kind of bossy, you know, that kind of makes me pull back somewhat. So and just try to be aware of that in a session, and do my best to kind of be neutral about it, and not engage the parts of me that want to kind of fight back.
Yeah, that's interesting. Countertransference with bossy men. Maybe, you know, we could talk a little bit about that, but let me address the first part of your comment, which is, how did they get to become better reflective listeners? I think that's a very important question. Some couples don't get there. This is a good example of one that did. And this was the year worth of the work. So I have a very, let's see if I can summarize it. I think the dialogue tool is in the toolbox on module 5, I want to say. I can pull up, I will email you and tell you where the dialogue tool is. And when I write the email with the link to the Zoom call, I'll tell you in which module it is. And if you don't have access to it, I'll send it to you. So, but it is, I am very interested in separating the role of the initiator of a concern, a complaint, an issue, from the one who is listening. I think that initiating well, the way that he did, with clarity, and this is what I want, this is what I don't want anymore, this is what's happening to me. When you say this, I feel this way, and I don't want that anymore. When that's an initiate, that's a skill of an initiator who's gotten better at figuring out how to initiate a concern, a complaint, an important issue. He used to not bring up issues that are important to him. So, and separate that from the role of the listener. So he learned to initiate and she learned to listen. They both did. They both did. But I think that one of the reasons why couples fight at home or in session is because there is a big confusion about what role they're playing. So when I say that when there's a fight, it's because one person is trying to make a point and the other person is trying to make a different point, and neither one of the points is getting across. So when I separate the initiator from the listener, which I do very early on in the treatment process, it's one of my first interventions. I tell them this. I tell them that they each have very important points, but they get confused about which turn it is for them to make a point. Whose turn is it to make a point? And whose turn is it to listen to the point of the other? And so the reason why they fight is because one is making a point and the other one is making another point. That's different. You know, they're different. They're not the same point, and neither one of them is listening to the point of the other. So that's what they learn to do in my work with them. That's what they learn to do. She learned to identify, oh, this is his point. I have to hear his point and get it. So the role of the listener is to get the point, to first to understand the point. What are you trying to tell me? And to become curious. So what did you mean when you say that? When you say, whatever, when you say, I need to feel taken care of, what do you mean? Well, when you say, we don't see eye to eye, what do you mean? Or when you say, we're not compatible, so a lot of times people make a point, but A, the point is not clear, and B, the listener of the point doesn't ask the questions to clarify the point. So I think the role of the listener is to understand the point, meaning to get it, and then to get it from their point of view. So that's how they got there, because I structure the initial sessions. I don't do that in this one because I'm letting them do it themselves. But in the initial stage of the treatment, I say that treatments have 3 stages. The first, the stabilization stage, the second stage, and the third stage. The going deeper stage is the second, and the third one is the prevention of relapse and maybe going even deeper. And in the first stage of the treatment process, this is what I spend a lot of time on. That's her point. That's not yours. Whose turn is it? Are you initiating or are you listening? What is your role in this? What do you want to talk about? Okay, so then you're the initiator today. Do you want to have a turn initiating later on? We won't have time for you to initiate later on. Maybe it will just be your, so maybe next time you can initiate. So I do a lot of work on clarifying whose turn it is to be the initiator. This comes out of the work of Ellen Bader and Pete Pearson from the Couples Institute. It's been transformative for my practice with couples. And I'll send you the link to the tool if you don't have it. Do you have any questions or comments about what I'm saying about how they got there?
Yeah, my follow-up was going to be, how do you do that in session? So you explained that very well. I was just curious. Like, I know there are a lot of different tools out there about explaining reflective listening and encouraging, like, assigning homework in terms of a reflective listening. And I think, like, one couple in particular that I'm working with, they show kind of some interest, but I can't seem to fully engage them in the benefit of it. So kind of seeing how you're intervening so that you're modeling it with them being a part of the modeling is really helpful for me to understand. So
yeah,
thanks.
And you came into the academy in June?
Yeah, this is my third monthly session.
So
yeah.
I think you'll hear a lot more about precisely what you're asking in other sessions.
Okay, that was
a lot more. This is a big part of what you're going to hear.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. But I do want to say something about assigning homework. I feel that couples need to experience in the session a different way of talking. In the session, before I send them out to test that on their own, they will not succeed on their own unless they get a profound shift in the way that they have a dialogue and experience it in that space of the session. So whenever I assign this for homework, because I think they're ready and they're not, and we often do that. We all do that. Okay, so when you go home, try this or try that, or how about this, or how about, and often they fail. They come, you ask them and they come back and they say, we didn't do it. I know I was supposed to do this, but I didn't do it. I didn't know how, or I didn't know, or I was too, whatever the reasons are. But very often our homework assignments fail. It's not uncommon for them to fail. And that is data, right? That means you did it too early, or this was a relapse, who knows, or you didn't do enough practice in the session. So it tells you how to redirect your homework assignments when they fail. I mean, that's always data. Okay, so how about you, Monica? Do you have any questions or comments about the session?
Hi, yeah, well, I only got through to probably about half of it, so I didn't hear the whole thing. But a couple of things. One is just based on this discussion, I find that probably the couples that need it the most, the kind of turn taking and slowed down, more controlled way of actually listening or speaking, tend to kind of lead with this attitude of, yeah, okay, yeah, we need to work on communication skills, or yes, yeah, we tried that, but let's get to the problem, like more concerned about the content. And it's just a good reminder for me, because those are the couples that tend to be the really strongly willed ones with lots of energy. And so it's just a good reminder for me that I have to be a little more authoritative when they're like that, and really insist on continuing to be slow and to practice.
Well, but let me give you some language to explain a little more why you do that. So what I tell people that are exactly the way you're describing them, they want to get to the problem, they want to get to the content, is because couples therapy is anxiety producing, because they've seen a non-resolution to their deep-seated impasses and problems for a very long time. And when they come to couples therapy, they expect that this will finally be the place where they're going to be able to solve their problems. And that's true, but they're not going to be able to solve them unless they learn how to talk about them differently. And I use the analogy of a business negotiation. I know it's not the best comparison, and some people may be turned off by that. And so if it is, then I tried to use a different one. But I say that in a business negotiation and contracts negotiation between two parties, when they're very far apart, the only way they get to a negotiated agreement is when they know where the other person stands. They know where the other person's bottom line is. They know what the other person wants, thinks, is able to give, is able to. So anybody who's learned either conflict resolution, I mean, you could take this from anything, whether it's business negotiations, conflict resolutions, divorce mediators, alternative dispute resolution. I mean, you could take it from any field that you want, that you think might fit the explanation for them. But the explanation is you're not going to be able to get to an agreement about whether a negotiated agreement or a compromise agreement, or even dropping. I mean, sometimes you drop something because you accept the way it is, whatever. You're not going to be able to solve the problem unless you talk about it differently. So are you willing or interested in letting me teach you how to talk about it differently? Do I have your permission to stop you when you do the same old? And if you let me do that, I'll show you a different path. So that's what I tell them when they go back to the content and they go back to the issue that they want to solve. I don't know if that's makes sense to you.
Yes, it does, and that's helpful. It's helpful because in those moments I need to have, I mean, even that analogy is helpful because it's something that gives, I think it gives at least the couples that I'm thinking of and their personalities, it gives them something to say, oh, okay, now I understand why. It's
Right.
not just that I'm having to do this. I think that what I heard you say is kind of psycho crap, stuff, which is what the kind of stuff that they say. But this really is a thing that makes a lot of sense now that I hear that analogy. Like I can imagine with the couples I have right now that would make a difference.
Especially for men.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing I say, if you win and she loses, you lose. So, right. So for people who are competitive, intent on winning at all costs, it's my way or the highway, it's the way I think, or what, any of those things, I use that analogy. I say, this is not a win-lose like a baseball game or like any sports, because in this realm of your relationship or your marriage or your stability or whatever, if you win, you lose. And sometimes they say, well, what do you mean by that? And I explain the way I just did. Or so there's a lot of stuff I talk about in the very beginning of the treatment process, a lot of psychoeducation stuff that I do in the beginning. And then when they, and based on that framework of my authority and my leadership, I ask them to let me interrupt them. But, it doesn't always work. I have people that I correct and interrupt and redirect, and they don't like it. They don't like to be redirected or corrected, and often men don't. So, which leads me to, so let me stop here and ask you something else before I talk a bit about the main intervention I do, which is the one at the end. And I want to say something about that more. But do you have any other questions, any other comments, any other thoughts, whether it's about the session or about the lesson? I don't know if you were able to hear the lesson or if you saw the tools, the 3 memory exercise or the modified attachment interview exercise. Have you, I don't know if you, it's always at the end, the tools are always at the end beyond the Zoom call link.
I'm just going to comment back on what you were just saying, which is, I think I often say to people, similarly to what you're saying, that you have to learn how to lose the fight, because exactly what you're saying, I think that's such a strong thing to give couples. So if you're winning over, so you killed the partner, you won, you killed your partner, great. This is not a good outcome for anyone at the end of the day. I think it helps sometimes to just say, who are you going to beat? But the other thing I was thinking also that fits for me with the interrupting, and I really like the defining of an initiator and a listener. But some of my motivation just that helps me to intervene too is I often don't understand. I think I'm listening to you respond to this person and I can see that they don't talk about the same, they're not talking about the same thing. And so I'm stopping you to say, this doesn't even make sense to me. So I know that it doesn't make sense to the two of you, or I'm assuming I'm inserting that question of whether it makes sense. And I think the thing that I sometimes say to people is, at the end of the day, all of us are thinking of our arguments while we're listening to the other person. It's just a very natural habitat. We're nervous people, or we think about what we're going to say while the other person is talking, and we're not listening to what the other person is talking. And so this is an arena in which I'm going to really make you stop, but I've never defined it as initiator and listener kind of, that you're initiating and you're not going to get to talk today about your things. You're just going to be responding. Maybe we'll get to time. Maybe you won't. I sometimes say I'll divide the time, which it sounds like you're doing as well. Like maybe today is all person A and next week is all person B, or half and half, or however, but it's not back, and saying it's not back and forth, I think can be so helpful in the beginning of just,
Right.
This is different than home,
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Listening is hard. It's a
Oh boy.
very difficult thing to learn to do.
Yeah.
Very hard. Any other comments or questions about the session or the lesson or the home or the tools?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, there was a moment at least in the part of the session that I listened to, when they were really like, they were both talking and you were trying to get them to stop and to listen, and they just kept on and kept on. And it was just one of those moments. This happens a lot of times in these recordings where I was like, that makes me feel better, because I'm not the only one that sometimes has a hard time getting people to stop and listen. It was just one of those moments where I was like, it was helpful to hear that happen, because that happens a lot of times in sessions, and I'm just like, wow, how can this be so out of control? So I wanted to say that.
Yeah, and in Zoom sessions, it's a little harder, I think. That I think you hear me talking over them. And they talk over me. So yeah, that happens. And in face-to-face sessions is a little bit better. I'll do a hand gesture, or I'll I don't know. I don't know if this is true, but I just have this feeling that in Zoom sessions, it's a little bit easier to talk over each other.
Yeah. And then I think the other thing is, I didn't this time get the chance to look at everything the way that I like to, but I wanted to join anyway, because I had this time to do so.
I'm so glad you did.
But I'm very excited and anxious to actually listen to the rest of the session and read the tools, because I feel like even though this type of couples therapy is not one that I have, studied or intentionally practiced, I think that the longer I do it, the more I, as I collect information through the sessions and whatnot about people's stories and their lives and attachment stuff, and you kind of get that inner world, you get the piece of that inner world. And so, but it's not helpful for me to just know it. So figuring out how to constructively use it and intervene with that information feels like.
And by this way, by not being used to doing it this way, you mean more intrapsychic work?
Right.
I mean, I think. Go ahead.
I think I usually start with, I think I can't help but start with a Bowenian framework. And then I think I mix in EFT and developmental kind of stuff, which all has bits of this in it, but I feel like this is more focused on the intrapsychic than any of those, obviously.
So you felt that way today when you listened, when you listened to the module 12 session, you felt like I was doing more intrapsychic work?
No, and I could tell that you had done more intrapsychic work with them based on the way they were talking about their stuff. But I'm just speaking in general about this kind of couples therapy. Yeah,
so this is a good segue to what I wanted to say. So let me talk a bit about if I'm understanding you correctly. So this session is an example of the third stage of the therapeutic process, where in the beginning, and for those of you who've been with me for a while, this will feel like a repetition, but for those of you who are new to working with me, what I try to do is, in the initial stages of the relationship, I do a lot more future-oriented, solution-focused narrative, and a bit of systemic interventions. And then once I have a strong, which I think those kinds of interventions strengthen the therapeutic alliance. And within a framework of, a very empathic understanding of each of their points of view, which is what Carolyn and you were talking about that the other day. So, a deep understanding, empathic understanding of each of their positions, in terms of, I can see why you feel this way, or I can totally get it, or no, just whatever your empathic tools are within, if combining it with future oriented. What do you want to be like? What kind of partner do you want to be for your partner? What kind of vision of a relationship do you have? If you were more intimately connected, what would you be doing? What would you be saying? And it's not until the second stage that I do family of origin based on Bohemian ideas, even maybe more EFT. And then finally, I go more intrapsychically, which is what I think I was doing with this couple in the past, and also a little bit today towards the end. I don't think you heard that part, Monica, but when I say to her, what I'm hearing is that you want to feel more taken care of. That is getting at her unconscious and hidden wishes and fears. And that is a more psychodynamic, intrapsychic kind of comment that she would not have tolerated a year ago. And she tolerated it and started to shift after she heard me say that. So and when you look at the psychoanalytic framework description on the audio lesson, you will see that she projects that onto him. I didn't get that far with her, but she projects that onto him. So in other words, she does not accept within herself that she is someone who wants to be taken care of. This is something she's struggling with within herself. She has ambivalence about that. I'm a strong woman. I don't need anybody. And yet she wants to feel taken care of by him in the way she felt taken care of by her father when she was growing up, and when he doesn't. But she struggles. This is how I understand what's going on with her, which I didn't do in the session, but this is how I understand it. She struggles with accepting that part of herself and projects it onto him. You are not taking care of me. And this is a very complex thing to unravel, but this is what I talk about in the lesson. So the projections and the projective identification and is what oftentimes is going on when couples don't make progress. So if you've done, at least this has been my experience. If I do all the work I want to do and they're still miserable, and they're still accusing, and they're still in blame mode, and they're still, that's projection. That's projection, and that's projective identification. There are aspects of themselves that they are not accepting of themselves, and they project them onto their partners. And if you could do some individual work in, and as I say in the lesson, when you do this work with an individual, it either individually or in the presence of the other, it is much more powerful than an individual treatment can be. So when you can get at some in-depth personal issues that each of them is bringing to the interpersonal relationship, that's when the work gets enriched. And I think some people can do that, and very often they can't. And I think I explained in the lesson why it is that people continue to be miserable and continue to blame for so many years, but staying in miserable relationships, and they don't leave because there is an unconscious reward of the blaming. So when you ask yourself, why doesn't this person stop the blaming? And why doesn't this person quit thinking that the fault of everything that's making her unhappy, if it's her, is his fault? There is an unconscious reward of that, because to look inward and to look at her own ambivalence and her own disowned parts of herself is so painful and so difficult that I'm never going to do that. And I'd rather have him as the enemy than myself. Because if I think of myself as my own enemy, that's going to be so painful and so difficult that I don't want to do that work. So this is what I call the third stage of the therapy. You know, some people quit after the first stage, and some people want to go further, and some people want to go even further. So this is a couple that has gone further, and which is why they can do what they do. So yeah, okay. But I just wanted to say a little about the lesson, and very often the lessons are not related to the sessions, but I think in this case it was. Because I also had to check my own countertransference. Do I push him? Do I argue with him? Or do I let it go? As you were saying, Linda, and I think Monica, you were talking about that too.
Sarah, could you say a little bit just about the individual work within the context? That's really striking me, of how doing the individual work in the context of a couple's work can be more powerful than them just going off and doing individual therapy on their own. And I know that you had said I think in the session that you had just met with her individually before, and maybe this is an it depends kind of situation, but is there a way that you structure that? Do you, if you see one partner individually, do you always see the other partner individually? Is there a way to do that doesn't just evoke, I think you have individual work to do, that lets the other one off the hook, I suppose, right? Like, or sets up a dynamic of, I'm less, unwell than you are, or something. Is there a question in there? Am I saying it clearly?
No, I am thinking about how to answer it, because it's a very important question, and it's one that comes up very often for me. What do I do? So let me back up and say something you've heard me say before, which is that I am very clear or I try to become very clear as I get to know the couple better, on what is it that they each need to be working on. That I see that as my first job, to try to figure that out. What is on your side of the sidewalk and what is on your side of the sidewalk? In fact, the first stage of treatment, the end of the first stage of treatment, I should say, leading into the second stage of treatment, is that piece. So let's take this case. What is her job? Her job is to be more accepting of the fact that his barometer is different, as she was saying at the end. And his job is to become more clear. So you've heard him do that. Now you don't know this about them because I didn't tell you, and because you don't know what they've been doing, but I'm telling you and sort of sharing with you that this was his job. If I think that he's not being as clear and as honest and as authentic as he needs to be, I will say that to him, and I will say, I think we need to do a little more work. I'm trying to understand what's happening to you, that knowing that this is what you want to get to, you're not getting there. What's the barrier? What's getting in the way? Do you want to do this with me and her in the room, or should we do this separately? So it's a dialogue I'm having with him based on his goals and based on the goals that we have arrived at collaboratively in the course of the first stage of the treatment, or towards the end of the first stage, or that we revise in the second, that we revise. So maybe in the beginning we thought this is what needed to happen, but now we realize this other thing needs to happen. So I'm going to give you another example. I've been working for almost 3 years with a couple where he knows exactly what she wants from him and he's not doing it. And we've gone over and over and over, what the barriers and the competitiveness and he's not wanting to do individual work. And he's gotten better, but so that I think this is actually true of many couples, that they each know what they need to do and they just don't do it. So that's the work. And the work in trying to more concretely answer your question about how do I decide, I have a dialogue with myself first and then with the client about how to best do that. And they know that they can request an individual session with me. So sometimes people request them. That's another thing I can tell you. And right, so I think I'm trying to answer your question. I hope I did.
Yeah, that's very helpful. It's a couple of things that I'm taking from it is there's a very direct and collaborative sort of understanding from them what they want, and then saying what you're seeing as needing attention, that creates this kind of shared goal that you then can go back to and say, I don't see, I see you not being clear for him or something, that I would imagine gets a buy-in. But it's also really helpful to, I have not offered people that they can request individual therapy sessions. That seems like a really good way to just, or something to put out there at the beginning and to just integrate into the course of couples therapy of this can be all of these things.
And about whether to when you feel like, oh, I'm saying that this guy needs an individual, but I'm saying, I'm not saying that to her. It is, it's okay. I may
Mhm.
say that to her another time, yeah, but because it's goal dependent.
Right, that's
Right.
right. That's the clarifying point. Yeah.
It's goal dependent, and it's what are you struggling with, and what in terms of where you need to get to, and how are you going to get there, and how are you going to clear the brush? Do you want to do it with me? Do you want to do it with someone else? And or do I want to do it with you? Another, I'm going to tell you an example of why I did. And he did ask me, you send me to an individual therapist and you didn't send her to an individual therapist. Why is that? And this just happened this week. So this was a discernment case. They were separated, and speaking about the issues, all he could talk about is the finances, and how much not on the same page they were, and how terrible it was, and how chaotic everything was, but in my individual, so this was the first session. In my individual sessions in discernment, I do one joint, at least two individuals with each, and then a last joint to decide what we're going to do. And when he and I met, he was very insightful about his own level of anxiety about the finances, about his own inability to collaborate with her. Because she took the steps, and he was flabbergasted at first, and then he started to realize what he had done, and so he started to talk about and so I asked him, what do you think is, what do you think happened to you? Well, I'm a very anxious person. Well, you're always an anxious. Well, yeah, I realize it now that I've always been an anxious. So we started talking about his anxiety, how he behaves because of his anxiety, and what he's done and what he wants to do instead. And I said to him, I don't know that I can help you with that. I'd like for you to see somebody to deal with that. Have you ever been in therapy? No. Have you ever taken medicine? No. Have you ever been in couples therapy? Yes, we were in couples therapy for 2 years, but what she said is the only one who was talking was him. That couples therapy didn't do anything because he was only talking. And I see the only one who was talking was him. No, but because the therapist didn't stop it. So I that was a recommendation I made to him, and I did not make it to her, in part because she had been in therapy before. She was a lot more aware. And I felt like I could help. She said things like, I've lost myself in this relationship. I want to find myself. I have stopped doing the things I want. So whatever she presents, I felt like I could help her with that. So that's another way that I judge whether I send one and not the other, or whether, or to see that, I hope that makes sense. So it's about what I want to do, or what I feel like I can do quicker or not. It just varies.
And in a situation like that, would there be any cause for concern that the one partner would feel like the other's more connected because she gets to have some individual sessions with you, but he's going to a different person, and then you guys meet together with you? Like, is there any reason to address that, or be concerned about that, or just sort of wait and see how they feel about it?
Yeah, I would be concerned about that imbalance if it were the case. If I had 5 individual sessions with her and none with him, I would be concerned.
Mm-hmm.
So I try not to do it that way. I would say things like, what are you hearing from I would balance it out. I would do more individual sessions with him too, but they would be based on the work he's doing with the individual therapist,
Okay.
so that I could understand a bit more about where he's at and what he's doing and how this is impacting relationally, what he, the interpersonal part.
Right. Oh, that makes sense. Okay.
So I don't know that, and as I've said in prior calls, I think when we send out somebody for individual therapy, we should be very careful to have close contact with that person, because an individual therapist can and often does destabilize a relationship. So I don't want to send them to somebody that I'd rather, if they don't choose the recommendation I make, I try to get in touch with that therapist very early on. But if I send them to somebody that I worked with in the past, I actually like to wait until they get to know them better and can do some of the work. But if it's somebody that I don't know, I wanna hear what they're telling the client right away, or I want to hear how they're thinking about the case right away, or I want to influence how they think about the case right away if I don't know them.
Can you clarify what you mean by destabilize? Do you mean the marital relationship or the therapeutic relationship?
A marital relationship. An individual therapist can destabilize a marital relationship and often does. So, do you want me to say a little more about that?
If that's an option, that'd be great. I'm curious.
So I'll see if I can get at this by saying it this way. The client will go to the therapist and the client will complain about the partner. If the therapist lets the client do that, they're not doing a good job. So let's say I don't do individual therapy anymore, but I have said, but if we're gonna do individual sessions or in the past when I have done individual work, extensive individual work, actually, I stayed with one client for about a year, even though I don't do this anymore. But in this case, I did it. They had done couples therapy, and then she stayed on as a client, and I stayed on with her. And one thing I told her is, when you come here to sessions, I'm going to do this with you on one condition, that when you come here, you don't talk about him. So, and she agreed. And then, with her permission, when she did that, and that's because I knew him, so I didn't need that information. In the beginning of an individual treatment, if you need a little bit of the information so that you know what's going on. But if you stay there and don't shift to the intrapsychic, then you can destabilize it. So the questions are not only how does that make you feel, but how do you respond to that? He's not giving me what I want. He's not doing what I need. So what do? How are you responding to that? What are you thinking? What are you saying? How destabilizing is that for him? So I use the same. I start out like that, and then what? Then we go back and do the intrapsychic work where, so disengaging when he disappoints you. Is this something you know? Is this familiar to you? Is this disappointment with a parent, disappointment as a child, disappointment, so then we go and trace back the disengagement as a tool to deal with hurtful feelings, disappointed feelings. But do you see how the focus is on her, not on him? When did you first, how else are you dealing with disappointments and hurt feelings and so when you hide, I can go back in time and try to figure out the origin of that defense mechanism, the origin of that survival strategy, the origin of that coping strategy. You can call it whatever you want. If you're a psychoanalyst, you'll call it a defense mechanism. If you're humanistic, you'll call it a coping strategy. If you're so if you're a trauma-based person, you'll say a survival strategy, but they're all the same, with different words. Where did you learn to do that in response to hurt? How did you learn it? What else did you learn about responding to hurt? So, because I'm always interested not in what happens to you or what happened, not in what your husband does now or not in what your father did, but what you did with that, because it's very idiosyncratic for individual people. There is no such thing as a universal response to trauma or to behavior or to loss or to disappointment. So it's very idiosyncratic. And what I think happens to a lot of therapists is they don't go to the idiosyncrasy of the individual client. They stay stuck with what actually happened to the client and what actually the client is reporting about the partner in this case. Any questions or comments about that?
That was great. Thanks.
You're welcome. So you hear me say to a lot of people, I'm not going to let you talk about him. I'm only going to let you talk about yourself. Are you game for that? Are you interested in that? So everything I do as an intervention or a major intervention, I need to get a buy-in from the client. Because if I don't get a buy-in from the client, then I don't have a therapeutic relationship. And so, just to continue with this idea of the second and third stage, I think a lot of the audios from the beginning modules, although that's not entirely true, I think some modules have more in-depth work, but just to clarify on how I do this work, I'm very focused on initial stage because I don't know how long people are going to stay with me, and because I want them to feel successful, and because I don't know them. So I couldn't go straight to the intrapsychic stuff because I don't know them. I don't know, and I have to get there. It's a very slow, painful process. Okay, so I think that's all I wanted to tell you. Monica, I'd like for you to hear the announcements when you get the recording of this, hear the first 10 minutes of announcements that you may have missed. And do you have anything else, any other comments or questions? I know there's only 3 of you, so it's hard to, I know you're on the, you maybe feel like you're on the spot because there's just a few of you, and which is why I said to people, send me some questions, because I could have, answered them, but I didn't get any, so I'm asking you.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't, we could shorten the Zoom call and be done with it. We don't have to go for the whole time.
Just separately, I have to leave at 12:15 just at that point, so I will pop out. You can keep talking if you want to, but I didn't want to just disappear without saying that.
Okay, thank you.
Well, it's unfortunate that I didn't get to listen to the whole thing, to hear the tool that you used or the intervention that you used at the end. I do have a lot of curiosity about the interventions and what you use when and what you find helpful, but I don't know that asking about that is necessarily appropriate, because maybe I would know it if once I read all this stuff. So at least that's what's on my mind. But
Yeah. Well, no, it's just that the intervention is about accessing their hidden fears and their hidden wishes, and they don't always accept them. You know, it's as if and because the timing is wrong, or because you don't, because sometimes it's because you're wrong about your interpretation, but other times it's because they are not accepting them. And so that's the work here, and trying to figure out how you can get them to accept, which is another reason for an individual session. So very often, if I may say something about that, continuing with the question about the individual session, the competitive nature and the stubbornness of some people will make it hard for them to access their own stuff in the presence of the other. So part of the work is to get them ready for that. So you do individual sessions in the beginning so that they can tolerate sharing their vulnerabilities with their partners, and talking about their inner stuff in the presence of their partners. So that's another reason for doing individual sessions. I wouldn't mind going back to Linda's comment about that sometimes when you are with a bossy man, it's hard for you, and that's a very, very common issue that a lot of therapists have, especially female therapists. So if I could just talk a little bit about that, or maybe ask you to talk about that, that might be helpful to further this issue of women therapists confronting bossy men.
And I think it's kind of a twofold thing. I think like there is the unconscious, issue I may have, but then I also think there's also the patriarchal issue of it's uncomfortable for men to be in a situation where a woman is more directive of them, which often happens in marriage therapy sessions, especially if it's contentious, and you're kind of trying to intervene and kind of give shape to the session. And I think it would be incredibly rare to have a male and female therapist, being able to be there as co-therapists. So then just by the mere fact of you being female and leading the session causes, some problems in terms of not feeling like they're being heard, or they're unfairly being sided against, or something like that by the therapist.
So this is a very important topic, Linda, and I don't know that I've ever addressed it because I hadn't talked about gender issues here, but I'm going to say a couple things about that. I totally agree with what you're saying, and being a female therapist had challenges is so that we need to name it. And so let me start by saying that what you're describing, so one of the legacies of patriarchy is that men will not allow themselves to be influenced by a woman, or will not allow themselves to be thinking about. So what I say men still cannot do is say, what did I do? Why are you so upset? What can I do differently? They still cannot ask that question. So a woman's wish is viewed by a guy as a criticism of them, and they cannot tolerate that. And that's another, so there's lots of things that have to do with patriarchy, but let's talk about the influence. So I will bring that up and I will say to him, what is it like for you to be influenced by me as a woman? I know you're struggling with the dog and you want to hear me. So remember, you can hear this recording if you get distracted. So I'll start with that. If I feel like there's something gender-wise going on, I will start by saying, how does it feel for you to be sitting here and hear this coming from a woman? So so that's one thing that I have done. I agree with Terry Real when he says men are not afraid of intimacy, they're afraid of subjugation. And it's he has a wonderful way of talking about men's issues. And I just have a slight disagreement with him, because what he says is he takes sides. He says, I'm not neutral. When she says, you're not hearing me, I take sides and I tell him she's right. My only slight disagreement with him is that I think he's right too about what his complaints are about her, in the sense of whatever his complaints are. She won't play golf with me. She won't have sex with me. She won't, whatever it is that his complaints are, whatever. I don't want to get into it now, but I'm just saying my only disagreement with Terry Real is that he says he takes sides often just with her because of the patriarchal piece. But the patriarchal piece is not the only piece that is influencing interpersonal relationships. There's lots of other things too. Patriarchy is one of them. I'm not denying that, but it's not the only one. And so I clear that I talk about that with him, because that is his piece. That is what I was saying earlier. This is one of the things that I try to discern very early on as I get to know them better. What is in each side of their sidewalks? What is it that he needs to work on? So if I feel like he needs to work on listening to her because he's not able to feel influenced by her, that's one of the things that Gottman says, that men don't allow their women to influence them. And that is the best predictor of relationship distress, when a man does not allow a woman to influence him with her complaints. That is one of the predictors of the relationship distress or relationship demise. In fact, 80% of divorces are initiated by women because of this reason. So it is a huge issue, and it's one that needs to be addressed therapeutically. Huge. I don't know that I answered you were making a very important comment. Am I getting in the right direction, Linda?
Definitely. Yeah. Thank you. That's helpful to hear, because you do need to attend to that, especially not every couple, but you can definitely sometimes just feel it. And so to kind of have a conversation about it makes a lot of sense, instead of trying to orchestrate things, in a subtext or something.
Right. To bring it up. I have a couple of more other examples that I'd like to share. So, because the legacy of patriarchy shows up in so many different ways. It shows up in inability to allow him to be influenced, but it also shows up in his inability to become vulnerable, right? And his inability So let's say in a first session, she starts. In the first session, I ask him, what are her complaints about you? Which is how I start very often a first session. What are her complaints about you? And he'll say that I don't contribute enough to the household duties, that I am not present enough, that I escape to television work or chilled or whatever, phone. So let's say he identifies it. Sometimes he says, I have no idea, which is not very common, but he'll articulate it. And so this is the first session I had. And so I said, is she right? So that's the influence part, right? Is she right that you are not doing all of what you say she says about you? And immediately she might take this as an opportunity to begin her long and aggressive rants. You don't do this, you don't do this, and on top of that, you don't do that, and on top of that, you don't do. So she'll take this as an opportunity to rage and rant about everything that he's acknowledging, and she'll say, and on top of that, you are worse than your father, you're no good, I shouldn't have married you. So you have the two things here. You have him not allowing himself to be influenced by her, because if she's complained about all these for so many years, how come you don't do anything about it? Right? How come you didn't do anything about all these complaints? That I don't do this, that I don't know. How come? You say you love her and you say you want to be with her and you want her happiness. How come you're not doing what she asked? That's the legacy of patriarchy. I don't do it because I don't have to listen to her. Now, he doesn't know this, so you got to have to get there. But the reverse is also her raging about that. I'll say to him, how does what she just did feel to you? This is the first session. And he'll try to weasel out of that question, and because he can't access a feeling. So I insist and ask it a couple more times, and I say, okay, so tell me again, how does this feel? Yeah, I know you're thinking that, but how does it actually feel in your gut when she does this? And he'll say, I feel hurt, very quietly. And I'll say, do you ever tell her that? And he'll say, no way, I'm supposed to take it, I'm a man. So that's another legacy of patriarchy. In his socialization as a man growing up, and in fact, I've written articles about this. I just wrote another one. We'll see if they accept it. In his socialization as a man, and Terry Real talks a lot about that, about men's socialization. And so this is why I like his work so much. He learned to hide his feelings, because the expression of feelings is seen as a feminine, lesser, degrading thing to do. If you're a man and you're strong, you're not supposed to feel that way. You're not supposed to you're not supposed to you're not supposed to be a sissy. And if you say you feel hurt, that means you can't take it, and that means you're not man enough. So I think that there's a lot of that stuff going on that we need to figure out how to deal with. If you try to push him too early to disclose his feelings, he's not going to do it. And if you don't push him, he's not going to get better. So it's always the balance between that's always the therapy. The art of the therapist. How do you push enough so that there's some change, but don't push too much so that they leave the therapy, right? So that dilemma is there, Linda, and I totally see it and deal with it all the time, especially as a woman therapist, which is why we need to bring it up.
Thanks.
Monica, yeah, go ahead, Linda.
Oh, I just wanted to say thanks.
You're welcome. Do you want to say anything, Monica, before we sign off?
No,
About,
I find that very helpful because it's a common sort of invisible or silent issue that's, I think, often going on in the background. And so there are sometimes when I'm keenly aware of it, but other times when I'm not, but I know it's always there. So it's just a really helpful thing to remember and to think about how to address instead
Right.
of just like you were saying, Linda, instead of just trying to figure out how to orchestrate things in a way to bring it up, like how to actually address it.
yeah, and I think we need to put gender at the forefront, gender role strain, gender differences. It's not just men and patriarchy. It's also women and their gender role strain and their mental load and yeah, you know, how much more they feel responsible for the well-being of their children and their mates to the detriment of their own. I mean, you know, you could call it another legacy of patriarchy, but it is right now, it shows up in gender role strain. It's not that he doesn't do as much as she does, is that she overdoes it.
Mhm.
And it's not that that he doesn't do it well, is that she doesn't like it when he does it differently. And it's not that she doesn't miss sexual encounters too. It's that she has a lot to do before she can have a headspace for having a sexual encounter, but never tells them. So collaboratively as a teamwork. Okay, so I get it. Yeah, let's try to figure this out. But so how about if you do this, this, and that, which he's amenable to because he's amenable to her influence, and then we can go and do it. But they don't do that. They don't have that kind of dialogue. So yeah, there's a legacy of patriarchy in both genders, and it's reflected in severe gender role strain on both genders. And I should do a lesson about that, and I haven't done it, and maybe I should just talk about it like we're doing now.
Yeah.
But we are running out of time, so I'm going to say thank you for all your questions and putting yourselves out there and coming to the meetings. And I appreciate it really very much. And I'll see you next month.
All right. Thank you, Sarah.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.